Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's video is yet another rant video, this time about Kyrie Irving and the Brooklyn Nets. But really quickly, before we get started, if you're new here and you like the NBA, consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day. Okay, so I'm going to be going in a lot of different directions in this rant, just so you know, before we even get started here. But we're going to begin with Kyrie himself. And there's been a relatively ongoing conversation throughout the season about the possibility that the Nets are better off without Kyrie Irving on the floor and healthy. He hasn't played since mid-November. The team got off to a bit of a slow start compared to, some of the expectations that people had for this team. Kyrie had a really good scoring start to the season, but from a team success standpoint, it just wasn't there. And then once he got hurt, they started playing really well. They were 9-3 in their first handful of games without Kyrie, but now they've lost, a handful of games in a row, and they're now 12-13 total without Kyrie Irving playing. And everybody knew, obviously, that it wasn't true. There was no way that a team is going to be better without a player as talented as Kyrie Irving, healthy and playing for them. And I just think that there's a lot of other things that you could point to for why this team, struggled in the beginning of the season and then got better. And that just happened to coincide with Kyrie not playing. Because remember, there's a lot of new pieces on this roster, that weren't there last year, whether it's Taurean Prince, who's played a really big role for this team, that they traded for in the offseason and kind of a salary dump move. They brought in DeAndre Jordan, and kind of trying to figure out who the starting five is between him and Jared Allen was a bit of a struggle in the beginning of the season. Then, of course, you have Kyrie. Karis LeVert has been hurt. Spencer Dinwiddie has had to step up, and he initially in the beginning of the season was not playing well at all because he had to adjust to not necessarily a new role for him. He's pretty much always been a bench guy and like a six-man scorer, but he wasn't getting as many opportunities because Kyrie and Karis LeVert, were both getting plenty of chances when they were healthy. And then there was other pieces that just weren't playing well. Like Rodion Kurucs was an important rotation piece for this team last year. He's barely played. There's been other injury issues. They've struggled to find consistent play on the wings, and it made sense. Like if you're taking away the Kyrie getting hurt thing, it made sense that they would struggle a bit to begin the season, and then they'd start to kind of figure it out over their next 12 games after that. And again, that just happened to coincide with Kyrie getting hurt. Now, I definitely think that there are times that Kyrie is not a beneficial basketball player to winning. And that was shown in his first handful of seasons in the league in Cleveland. Before LeBron got there, he was scoring the ball a ton, but they weren't winning very many games. Not, atypical of a player in the beginning of his career, specifically on a team without much talent and a team that didn't draft extremely well outside of getting Irving. And then obviously LeBron came back. And then it goes to the Celtics in a situation that Kyrie enjoyed being in after a year, but didn't necessarily want to be there initially in terms of when he first requested his trade away from Cleveland. Boston wasn't really high on his list, but he ended up going there anyway. And all of the conversation about the Kyrie Irving era in Boston is about, what happened last year. And it certainly wasn't good. This is a team that came into the season with very high expectations, and it's pretty much just been decided by everybody that the reason that team wasn't successful was because Kyrie, ruined the team chemistry or whatever it was. And for me, that's where the basis of this frustration comes from, because we've all come to this conclusion collectively that there's no opinion you can have other than Kyrie Irving is bad for your basketball team because of the issues the Celtics had, and then the fact that the Nets were playing better without him initially. And then, like I said, that record has certainly dropped off. But we never are allowed to have any other kind of opinion, right? Because I don't think that's necessarily true. And obviously there's bias here because I don't want the Nets to be worse without Kyrie. I love watching Kyrie play. This is my team. I want them to be good, and I want this whole Kyrie KD thing to work out. I'm fully admitting that there's a bit of bias here in terms of me being a little bit more optimistic about this situation. But let's just think about this. Kyrie's first season in Boston when he was healthy, they began the season on like a 16 or 17 game winning streak. They lost their first couple of games, and then they won like 16 or 17 in a row. Kyrie was there, and he was a part of that. Then you move on to last year, and yes, that team had plenty of issues. They still won almost 50 games despite those issues, and there were certainly problems that Kyrie created on that roster. He spoke publicly too often. He wasn't a great leader, and I think he's more understanding of that now, and understanding that leadership is just not something that he is naturally good at, and he assumed that he knew too much just because he had won a championship. Absolutely, there were things that he was at fault for there. And now this Celtics team is playing better this year as a team collectively. But again, I think there are other reasons for that. He's not the only one that left that team. Morris brother isn't there anymore. Terry Rozier isn't there anymore. Al Horford isn't there anymore. And Kyrie left, and they replaced him with a guy in Kemba Walker that just fits what Brad Stevens wants to do a little bit more and what works for that team a little bit more. Because you have to understand that, again, there's more pieces involved here than just Kyrie, because that team had a couple of wing players, namely Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, that wanted to do more than they were being asked. They didn't just want to be role players. They didn't want to be off-ball shooters and defenders. They wanted the ball in their hands. They wanted to be able to create because they're good enough to do those kinds of things. And also, they want to get paid. They want a new extension. Jaylen Brown just got a big extension this offseason. Jason Tatum's going to be eligible for one this offseason. And those guys know that they're more valuable when they show that they can be playmakers and scorers and not just off-ball players. So they didn't want to play in that role. Terry Rozier had plenty of issues with that team. Marquise Morris or Markieff, whichever it was, had issues with that team. And all of this stuff just continues to fall on Kyrie, and then we confirm those beliefs based off of a 12-game run or whatever it is when Kyrie initially goes down, and this Nets team goes 9-3 without him after struggling to a certain extent through 14 games. And people love to throw the small sample size argument at me, but when it goes against what the widely held community belief is, we never throw in the small sample size thing. Through 14 games, the Nets were like 6-8 with Kyrie. Then he went out, they were 9-3, and everybody decided that it was because he was hurt, and that's why they were playing better. And now they stink. They're awful because they don't have enough guys that can make plays, and Spencer Dinwiddie is not going to be able to score 40 a night every single night. And there are other issues with this team. They don't have a great player at the 4 spot that fits in an ideal role. They're not outstanding defensively, and again, just a lack of perimeter creativity because both Caris LeVert and Kyrie Irving have been out. Nobody was sitting there saying, oh, the Nets are better without Caris LeVert. This is their record since he's been hurt, because his injury has pretty much lined up exactly with Kyrie's, and he's about to come back and Kyrie isn't. But we all just assume, and we all go to this one solution that has just been decided for us at this point, and we've all just said, you know what, Kyrie's bad for the team. Every team that Kyrie is going to be on is going to be worse off because he's there. And that's just not true, right? Were the Cleveland Cavaliers better off when Kyrie left? No. And you can say that that's because they got almost no value in return for him in a trade. And he's a supremely talented offensive player that was allowed to do everything that he needed to be able to do to be successful in Cleveland in terms of being an isolation-heavy player. But you can't sit there and tell me that they were better off just because his presence was not there. And that's the argument that's being made for the most part, whether it's in Boston or in Brooklyn. People were trying to make the argument that if you just remove him from the basketball team and don't replace him with anything, they're better off. And that wasn't the case in Cleveland at all, and arguably in any of these other situations either, because think about it. The Celtics replaced, to a certain extent, what they lost in Kyrie Irving with Kemba Walker. They didn't really replace any of the other guys, whether it's Horford or Morris or Rozier. They didn't really replace any of those guys, and they're playing better, right? So you can't just say, this is what's happening. There's so many other things that factor into whether things are going right or they're going wrong. And that's my biggest frustration here, is just the fact that it's been decided for us, right? Like, you're not allowed to have any other opinion other than the Nets are better off without Kyrie. And it's just not true. This team is better when Kyrie Irving is healthy, and it's going to take more than 14 games to get him fully integrated with all these new teammates. He's never played with any of these guys before, and it's going to take some time. And for me, I really don't even care about this season in terms of our record. I'm so focused on next year, making sure that we're well set up for when KD comes back, making sure that KD's coming back healthy, making sure that Kyrie is coming back healthy and not rushing him back with whatever shoulder injury he's had. And it's been a really frustrating thing for me to watch develop, because everybody has just kind of come to the same conclusion that this guy's bad for the team. And by all reports, when you're talking about coming directly from the team, now obviously there's no incentive for the team to say, anything negative about Kyrie publicly. But when you're just going based off what the team has said, they've said that, he's been outstanding at everything they've asked him to do to this point from a team perspective. And yeah, there have been some reports that come out, from Boston writers and from other people that were affiliated with the Celtics comparing last year's experience to this year's, saying that there's already been issues. And I don't know. I just feel like there's such a willingness to accept those things, and maybe fairly so, because like I said, he's not without fault with the Celtics thing that happened last year, but we can't just hear one report or two reports and be like, okay, this is exactly what's happening. Look, we saw this in Boston last year. It's happening again, without ever actually thinking about it and looking into it. This team is better with Kyrie. It's definitely beneficial for them to prioritize his health, his happiness, make sure that he's good, make sure that this team is well set up for the future and for next year. And to insinuate otherwise is just kind of moronic to me. And again, the last point that I want to make here before we end this, pretty long-winded rant, this Nets team, as much as I love them, it's not like these guys were world beaters last year, right? They were good. They were better than people thought. They were 2 games above 500, though. They were 42-40 at the end of the season, and they added all these new pieces in. So the expectation couldn't have been that suddenly they're going to win 50 games this year. And it seems like people, because they just didn't pay that much attention to that Nets team last year until they ended up getting these big free agents, people think that they were, super good last year and they were a real threat in the postseason. That wasn't the case. They overachieved. They outperformed their expectations, and now they added new pieces, and things are going to take time to develop and to gel. And I just wish that people would consider that a little bit more and think about the actual team and the dynamics, rather than just as soon as something goes wrong or there's issues, that it's all about Kyrie and it's all Kyrie's fault. And again, I'm definitely biased here, right? I'll fully admit that I'm biased here, and maybe I'm apologizing too much for Kyrie, and he definitely is at fault for a good amount of the things that happened in Boston. But I don't think we're at this point where we can just automatically say things are going wrong, it's his fault. But there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.